Are you a commercial landlord who is wondering what your obligations are during the pandemic? Let's take a look. Hi, my name is Mark and I'm from Umo Finance, and we are property and business finance specialists. Today's video is around commercial landlords and their obligations during the COVID-19 pandemic. So we've enlisted the help of Tom Howells from Insight Law, who's going to let us know what the legal obligations are.
Hey Tom, thanks for agreeing to speak to us this evening. I really appreciate you taking the time. I've been asked a lot of questions, obviously, around COVID-19, around the impact that's having on businesses and the revenue, and the impact it's having on their revenue, I should say. Commercial premises, commercial leases, both on a landlord and a tenant basis. Can you give us a little insight as to where the legal standpoint is, where people can't perhaps afford to pay rents?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, thanks, Mark, for the invite as well. Appreciate it. So effectively, unprecedented times. I promised myself I wouldn't say that, but obviously everyone is saying the same thing time after time after time. The government stepped in fairly quickly to pass the Coronavirus Act quickly to ensure that they were responding to industry needs to deal with that. Okay, in terms of landlords and looking at landlords' obligations during this period, there is, broadly speaking, there's no change. So, for example, repairing obligations in the leases, they remain, with the caveat that they're subject to a sort of common sense approach based on a health and safety aspect. So things like gas safety certificates, fire risk assessments, EPCs, things like that. I mean, if they're not essential, they don't need to be done. If they are essential for health and safety, then they do. But ultimately, like you said at the start, the main issue really is going to be revolved around rent and the ability of tenants to make their rental payments in the way that they have been doing up until this point. And having, since the Act was passed, there's now a moratorium on which prevents landlords from initiating new forfeiture proceedings. And in addition to that, any existing court proceedings whereby forfeiture hasn't yet taken place are delayed until the period, the initial moratorium period, comes to an end at the end of June. That is subject to change and extension, so it remains to be seen how that pans out, and it could well go beyond that. From a landlord's perspective, it's important to note that tenants are still liable to pay their rent, and the Act includes rent, includes service charges under the definition of rent, as well as a good commercial lease would, and any other normal payments the tenants have been making to the landlord are deemed to be rental payments. And simply, just because a landlord is not now able to initiate forfeiture proceedings, they're not being viewed to have, they're not being deemed to have waived their ability to do this when the moratorium period is lifted. Okay, the Act itself doesn't prevent forfeiture for other breaches of leases, and it doesn't prevent action against guarantors, or it didn't at the outset. There were some comments about whether that would change. I'm not certain if that's happened. I don't think that's happened yet. Initially, it wasn't the case. And it also doesn't prevent landlords from taking steps to forfeit leases via winding up company tenants in that way. So it does go some way to protect the tenant, but there are still ways that landlords can enforce against them should they feel the need to. However, in practice, I don't think there are going to be many tenants out there queuing up for new leases at the moment, given everything is in lockdown, and virtually most sectors are affected, and therefore any landlord now is not going to want an empty premises, as well as having to cough up for empty rates, etc., while they're looking for a new tenant. So there's that element of it to consider as well. I think really my advice, broadly speaking, to any landlords out there now in the first stages would be to speak to your tenant, find out what they can pay. Good landlords, they need a survival plan, and they will have thought about this. It's not news to anyone. Everyone knows it's happening. Everyone's affected by it. And if that means that that the landlord needs to sort of amend the amount of rent being paid or collect for a certain period of time. Potentially you could consider changing the frequency when rent is paid. You know, can you imagine the difference, a quarterly payment of rent at the end of March, which would have been in line with many commercial leases, compared to monthly payments of rent throughout March, April, May, June, etc. That will have a massive impact on cash flow for tenants, at no detriment to the landlord, really. So, you know, that bringing that flexibility to the table will certainly go a long way. There's also, obviously, landlords won't want to do this, but there's a potentially reducing rent if that is an absolute must. One thing as well is, you know, I think true landlords will be aware of the government assistance being provided through business grants, etc., which I'll touch upon more in different interviews with you. And, you know, potentially if your tenant is entitled to something that they're not aware of, it's better for you to help them to get that than to leave them go without without the ability to pay you the full amount.
Yeah.
Secondly, I mean, speak to your lawyer. I mean, we are getting lots of calls from landlord clients now and asking us, is there anything that they can do as part of the, you know, under the provisions of the lease as currently drafted. You never know. There may be provisions in there which by you can take advantage of. Is there a rent deposit deed potentially that can be utilised to cover any loss of rent? It all depends on the circumstances, but it's certainly worth having a look. And finally, where you've got lending against your property, albeit as a landlord, but, you know, lender clients of mine are considering mortgage holiday payments, but the key for them is that they want to know, is it absolutely essential, because probably only once this is going to happen. And secondly, they're asking, the question is that what I've said previously is, have they considered any alternatives available? Have they spoken to the tenant? Is there a payment plan in place or proposed? Because they really want to know about those steps before they would grant any mortgage payment holiday. So those are the sort of three key areas that I think I would suggest to landlord clients at this moment.
Yeah. Okay. No, fantastic. Yeah, I think that's one of the key things. That's one of the feedbacks I'm getting from some of my commercial premise landlords, is that, yeah, absolutely go and seek the help and assistance from the government sources. First and foremost, can you defer your VAT? What impact does that have? Prepared to have that conversation with you, but you need to do your bit and I'll do my bit. And together, hopefully, we'll be able to come to a mutual agreement that means that we're both in a position where we can ride this out and maintain our relationship there on after. So no, that's a great piece of feedback. So very brief and concise. Really appreciate that. As I say, there's plenty more information I'm sure that you can share on issue. It's each case on its own merit in many regards. So that's just a general overview. And yeah, I think if you've got any questions or anything like that, we'll direct our clients or any viewers to come and speak to you about their specific circumstances if they do wish so. So yeah, thanks.
Absolutely, yeah. No problem. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's okay. Thanks very much. Really appreciate it. And yeah, I'll catch up with you later.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Cheers. Ta.
Okay, great. So I just wanted to touch upon a few points raised by Tom. Firstly being since the introduction of the Coronavirus Act 2020, not a great deal has changed other than the fact that you can't forfeit a lease for non-payment of rent up until the moratorium is completed at the end of June. Obviously, tenants cannot withhold rent. There are resources available for them, and I would actively encourage them to seek those resources in order to enable them to keep up their rent repayments. Whilst non-payment of rent is something that you can't forfeit a lease for, it does not mean that you can't forfeit a lease for any other reason. As always in these scenarios, if you're having difficulty, engage with your solicitor. And lastly, we'd always encourage open dialogue. If you can speak to your tenant to negotiate an amicable solution to the problem, then that's got to be the strongest way forward. So there we have it. That's the commercial landlord and your obligations. Hopefully you found that very useful, and we look forward to seeing you soon.